you come out here.
Oh, cool.
Yep. I believe your mum was born in Australia.
Yeah, I know. It's a hard cross to bear.
Have you ever pondered how your life may have panned out had she not gone to England and you'd stayed there and been born and bred in Australia?
But it wasn't her. It was her mother.
Oh, sorry. Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is the big mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So, this was the big mystery, why she left, why the mother left, my nan. Why did she leave?
And did you ever solve that mystery, or have you ever tried to trace it?
Yeah, because my mother had 4 brothers, and she was the youngest. And so one of the brothers, i.e., my uncle Horace, he was called. He was quite a character, Horace, and he loved Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as he could get back, he did. But that wasn't until he was 80 or something. And he used to say, why there was a couple of mysteries about Australia, right? One was the Concertina Jack one, because that was some on my mother's side again. And he left Dartford. He left 12 children in Dartford to go to Sydney. You see, so why did he leave? And so that he reckons that was either a woman or it was a money thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he died in Sydney, and he went out there in the 1880s with his stepmother, who was already in her 70s, on a sailing ship, and she worked her passage.
Okay.
So that was a kind of like, why did they, that wasn't obviously very well planned. So that was one mystery that Horace used to say. And then the second mystery was, why on earth did a woman with 5 children during the First World War, whose husband was working for the Admiralty, because he worked building boats for the Admiralty, why on earth did they take a risky passage across the Pacific and across the Atlantic to come back to England during that period? It was a very, very silly decision. And what was the reason for it? We don't know. I mean, when we were kids, we were told the reason was, it was too hot, or something like that. I mean, mind you, in those days there was no refrigeration, and it probably was a bit hot, because they were all Poms with very light skin. They probably didn't like the heat very much. My mother didn't like the heat, so there may have been something in that.
But I believe you.
I'm just doing an interview now. I can't talk now.
I believe you had a wonderful experience on your last trip to Australia, catching up with cousins and reconnecting the Australian connection in your family.
Yeah, I mean, I've done that a few times, but unfortunately a lot of those earlier generations, they're not really around anymore, obviously. So so that's kind of gone. But there's been so anyway, just to finish that story, so there were 4 brothers and my mother all came back to England. Then one of the uncles came back and lived in Australia and the grandfather, he never came back. That was the other mystery. So that was quite a big, not a trauma, but that was quite a big thing. So my mother never knew her father.
Okay.
He remained in Australia, and back in the old days these things weren't talked about very much, and so letters took a long time, and people didn't make phone calls. So to all intents and purposes, Australia might have been a penal colony, on the other side of the moon.
Do you have an earliest musical memory? I believe it wasn't a terribly musical household for you growing up.
Just to finish that, when I was doing the thing, I realised, of course, between Britain and Australia, there were so many families that had the similar experience. of separation.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a big thing, obviously. I mean, now it isn't, because you can just get on an aeroplane, can't you?
That's right. Or talk to somebody on Skype.
Talk to someone on Skype. Anyway, so that's that. But yeah, I mean, because of that and all that stuff, there is quite a big affinity. And then when I come to Australia, I sort of feel kind of funnily, I feel this kind of long association.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then, I meet people and stuff, and I feel quite at home, just as my uncle did. He loved going there. Even when he was 90 years old, he just loved it. He said, because his joke was, when he was coming back to England in the 1916, he said, we were going the wrong way. So anyway, okay, so that's dealt with that one.
Yeah, so musically, any early musical memories in the household growing up?
Well, there was two sides to it. We didn't really have back in the dark ages, and the big thing was to get a record player.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the record player bought. But then you've got to remember, records were very expensive items. So to have a record collection was quite a big deal. So people used to borrow records quite a lot. And then of course, if you messed it up or scratched it, you would never borrow another one. But I mean, the first records were like 78. So we had 78s, like Little Richard and Hound Dog by Elvis Presley, and those were the first records I remember, rock and roll records, listening to, apart from what you heard on the radio, which was pretty limited because it was only the BBC, and they only played a lot of old-fashioned hogwash. I mean, they played the only station you could really hear any modern music was Radio Luxembourg,
mm-hmm.
which is a commercial station, in Europe, and you can only really get a reception at night.
Okay.
2:08 a.m. And it was pretty bad reception. And they had these DJs that would play pop records. It was the beginning of that.
Mm.
So, but it was very, very limited. So in order to hear stuff, I mean, I heard stuff off my brother because he picked stuff up from friends and bought stuff himself. You'd have to go to London. There was a store in London called Dobell's Jazz and Blues Records on Charing Cross Road. It was like the Holy Grail. And they had jazz records and some R&B, okay, not pop records,
mm-hmm.
R&B and blues records. So if you went and bought a John Lee Hooker album or something, it was like, you spend weeks saving up for it, and then it was a big thing, it was like a rites of passage, that whole thing of albums. I mean, now the sort of triviality of downloads is almost reduced it. Has reduced the whole experience to like blowing your nose on a tissue and throwing it away.
Sad but true. Yeah. So what do you think was about blues music that drew you in and intrigued you?
Well, there was blues music, but initially it was more rhythm and blues. So there was, and everyone used to say R&B, and they say, what is it? That was the big question. What is R&B? And that was a kind of soul music, because blues was a bit not one-dimensional, but it was a bit, hardcore blues. So obviously you had people like Solomon Burke or, lots of people really, Sam Cooke. They mixed gospel and blues and a little bit of rock and roll, or Little Richard,
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite exciting music because it was kind of coming out of the churches and out of all that stuff into a mainstream audience. Ray Charles. I guess Ray Charles probably epitomizes that whole period, and the record that epitomized it, if you were playing something there, would be What I Say. I think it was one of the first 45s. I think probably it was the first 45 practically my brother bought, and it was a two-sided record, which
That's
was
right.
really. It had an A side and B side. The B side was a continuation of the A side,
Mm-hmm.
and at the end of the A side, he'd go, he'd stop playing, and everyone would go, "Oh, hey!" He'd go, wait a minute, all right. And so it was like, wow, they're having a party on this record. And then you had to leave the arm of the record player up, and then you'd have to pull off the needle, flip the record over, and then put the needle back on in a sort of continuous process, so you didn't lose. It was kind of worked, And then you play the B side of What I Say, which was basically the same as the A side, only just a bit more kind of loose,
That's right.
That was I'd say that was a pretty seminal record, What I Say, Ray Charles. And you've probably seen the film of him and all that. And
Yeah.
a lot of people opposed his bringing the music out of the churches and making it kind of popular. And of course he was blind. Wow, he's blind too, wow. And so I guess people like that were pretty much big inspiration.
So when you started recording your own music, was it more a help or a hindrance having a brother already famous and successful? I guess no doubt you would have encountered the inevitable comparisons and stuff like that, which would have driven you nuts, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, it was a pretty stupid idea. I don't know why I did it, honestly. I think in retrospect I would have been better being a music publisher. They seem to have made all the money.
Yeah, true.
And then just sort of like played around myself a bit. But I'd always sort of written a little part, like a lot of adolescents do. I always written poems and little stories and stuff like that, ideas up. So that was kind of songs, weren't they? And that's the beginning of kind of coming up with your own little tunes. But I was quite a slow starter on that, really. So I didn't really do that until I was in my 20s. And then what happened is, in actual fact, the thing was that when I started doing those couple of albums, soon after that, punk came along, and I was too old for punk. And I think probably had I been born a few years later, I probably would have been in that punk period.
Oh, yeah.
And it probably would have suited me quite well. So I was sort of born in between, because I remember when I was trying to get getting interest in commercial thing, you expected to be very polished, and it had to be really well done, and there were no rough edges. They didn't want the rough edges. And then a couple of years later, that was all went out the window. The more rough and ready it was, the better, So, and then I was already like 25 years old or something. I was way too old to be a punk. Or 24. So
yeah,
I sort of slightly fell between. I think a lot of this stuff is depending on the era you're born into, what your influences are, and right place, right place at the right time. It means everything, doesn't it?
The punks at the time probably would have just looked at you and thought, the child of the 60s sort of thing.
Yeah, I was too old, but I mean, that's what I'm saying. Having been a little bit younger, I probably would have embraced the whole thing.
Yeah. From what I've seen and read and heard of you, I don't get the impression that you look at your brother's career with any envy or anything, because there's an advantage in your career that you've got the freedom to pursue music and any pursuits that you want to pursue that somebody under the spotlight probably doesn't have. Would that be a fair comment?
Well, yeah, I mean, success kind of carries its own kind of I think it happened to David Bowie, didn't it? He stopped performing because he didn't want to go out and just do all his greatest hits. He's just bored with it. So, and then people sort of booed if he didn't play them or something. I mean, so what? I mean, that happens quite a lot. You have to reinvent yourself. I mean, I was listening. I'm a bit of a Frank Sinatra fan from time to time, and he was so successful. Then in his later career, they tried to sort of reinvent him. And I bought this album of duets, and it was dreadful. It was sort of like only he didn't live long enough to see how people came back to all that swing music and embraced it.
Yeah,
and so yeah, there was, he was super, he'd done the thing, he'd done it all. What was he going to do? He wasn't going to sit and play an acoustic guitar and do country songs, was he? I think people find it quite hard. Well, some people I've known in the music business and have been quite successful and had that. And then the success, what peters off. And then they kind of go, they don't really want to go and play down the pub because they're too grand for that. And so they have to sort of live out their kind of days with a kind of, I don't know. I mean, from my point of view, I think it makes you more creative, and you have to reinvent. You have to. I mean, I still feel I'm really trying to be kind of creative still, and I'm still trying to be discovered. I'm nearly 70 years old. And, then sort of, but that keeps you going. Some guy said to me, a drummer I know, Pete York, he played with Spencer Davis Group.
Oh, yeah.
And they, keep on running and all that. And they never made any money out of the records. Stevie Winwood made some money out of it. And so he was forced to play. He said to me, well, he was quite bitter up to a point because he never made any money out of all those records. They were sort of ripped off by, Island Records and stuff. So, but then he said to me, well, if I had made a load of money, I wouldn't have played with all the people I played with. He went to Germany, he played with all these jazz people that he loved. He played all these little gigs. He played with these comedians. He had to get out on the road and play, because he didn't have the money otherwise. So he said, I never would have done that had I been quite rich and living in a big house and all that stuff. So, you count your blessings, don't you? And I mean, what fortified me along the road, even though I haven't been very successful, is the musicians that I've played with. And of course, you see a lot of these musicians that are really good, great players. You look at them, they haven't really had success because it's just a coincidence they didn't get in they left the band at the wrong time, or they did that. There's all kinds of little funny reasons why certain players didn't have hits or that didn't quite make it in that way. And I mean, I've been playing with Charlie Hart for years and years, and he has a lot of respect. I mean, Pete Townsend said, and I'm coming to Australia with Charlie Hart, which I'm really pleased about. So, and Pete Townsend said to me one time, he said, yeah, Charlie Hart, he's a very clever man. In fact, Charlie's been working with Roger Daltrey quite a bit. He worked with Van Morrison, so I've been gratified by having the association of these people who've respected me and what I've done and given me confidence. And so that's been really important to me. Okay, you haven't got the confidence of having a commercial success, but musicians, they're, I wouldn't say cynical, but they're quite skeptical about all that, because obviously some people who could hardly bash a drum kit had sold millions of records, or whatever, and then some people who are brilliant never sold any records.
Yeah, that's very true.
It's a fun thing. And I was always just saying, like, somebody like Charlie Watts playing the Rolling Stones, he'll finish the gig, he'll go and see a favourite jazz drummer in a little a little gig in some little club in some little town in America or something, and he'll be completely overawed by this drummer because he knows this jazz drummer is like a fantastic standard, and he's played with all these great people, and they're totally in awe of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then this jazz drummer won't think, he'll just think, yeah, Charlie Watts plays in a pop group. He's made a lot. He's not really, you know, I mean, it's sort of, it's funny, really. I think all musicians, I think, that, or it should be, that all musicians respect each other. And the success thing shouldn't really come into it because you're all trading in a common currency.
Yeah. How do you look back on those two first albums of yours back in the 70s? If you could go back, would you do them any differently?
Probably, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I did listen. I did listen to some years ago. I was in Poland. A friend of mine, a complete vinyl freak, and I had a room, and he had a great record player, and he had all these vinyl stuff. And I put my vinyl album on, and I was a bit fearful about it. And I went, oh, I was quite surprised. I thought it was quite good. And a friend of mine, John Dent, who does mastering, he has a theory that all bands in the 70s, that sound great because it was all recorded on tape and it was all put out on vinyl. Mm-hmm. And it just sounds much better than all the digital stuff.
Yeah, there's probably something to be said for that. For sure.
But, yeah.
You stepped away from recording after those albums. Was there a particular catalyst in that?
Well, yeah, I did some acting. I mean, I went to Los Angeles and tried to sort of make a bit of a breakthrough there. And, you know, I came close to, you know, doing some good stuff. And I nearly sold a song to Chaka Khan, and, you know, maybe Rod Stewart might have recorded something. I was going to record with Steve Cropper, and then almost happened, and then this, that, and the other. And then I just thought, oh, this is like doing my head in. And I had the opportunity to do some acting classes. So I did that. And then I came back to UK, and I just got a job doing this acting with a black guy in this theatre. And so I launched myself into that, and then I did do some music, even in these plays. Because they said, "Oh, great! Well, you can sing. You know, like we'll keep that in." And then one of the plays I had to sing "Kosi Sikelele Africa," which is like the national anthem of South Africa. During this time, it was apartheid, and I stood out and I sang that song in the theatre. And I remember the first night, and all these Africans stood up and all sang with me. You know, it was like really moving. So it was still you know, I was performing. I was still performing, but then I still did play with bands. I did do some gigs.
Okay.
But then so I carried on gigging, but I hadn't made a recording because we had punk. Then we had punk. Then we had new wave with all these synthesizer stuff. Then we had new romantics, didn't we? Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody from Motorhead was very enamored of that period. We had disco. We had disco, didn't we?
Yeah.
I think I did a few things a bit like disco, because I remember doing some recording with the Blockheads, because I knew Ian Dury quite well and I knew all his band, and Charlie worked with his band and all that, and I remember doing some recordings with a bit like that kind of funky sort of disco-y thing, you know. Nothing ever happened with that. And then finally CDs came out. And when CDs came out, everyone started reissuing all the old stuff in CDs, and they went, "Oh, I listened to this Howling Wolf CD. Wow, it's fantastic!" And so people's listening experience suddenly was widened hugely. And so I think that was a good time to record because people were open for, there was a more roots music came into. People were interested in folk music, roots music, old blues music. Suddenly, because this wasn't you had to get this before on cassette. Remember,
As
so
part of
that's when it's a 19-year break. But so what?
as part of your theatre work, you're involved in a production of Hair, I believe, for a few months. How do you look back on that?
That was even before I did my records. That was actually the first public performance I ever did was in Hair.
Oh.
But luckily it was in Tel Aviv, so no one saw it.
Well, you clothed or unclothed?
Oh yeah. Well, no. Have you ever seen Hair?
No, I haven't, but I believe there's a lot of nudity.
You see, you don't know anything about it. There's one scene in Hair where they have a big parachute on stage, and it's the end of the first half, and then you emerge from the parachute, and then all the cast just around the edge of the parachute, just standing there, and it's very low light and everything. It's more like a kind of spectacle,
Yep.
And they said to people, if you don't want to take your clothes off, don't take your clothes off. You weren't forced it. It wasn't like some movie where they say, right, here's the nude scene, So and there was a few lights flashing around, and it was a big sort of publicity thing, really. But from the front, it did look quite impressive,
Mm-hmm.
It was part of the show. It wasn't like a striptease done for titillation. But I remember there was one guy in it who came from New York, because the cast was a mixture of Israeli people, because it was in Hebrew, and then other people. There was people from New York, there was some black guys from England, and it was a mixture of people. That's how they did it. And there was one guy at the very and he had red hair, bright red hair, and a red beard and red pubes, and he stood at the front. It was quite a bit of a show off, and he stood at the front, and then someone in the production thing said, "Would you mind standing at the back?" I don't know why. Well, you call it in Australia, you call them blue, don't you? And if you've got blue eyes and red hair,
you're bluey. Yeah,
bluey. You're
bluey.
Bluey. All right, bluey. Stand at the back where you're putting off the customers.
I believe there was a special edition guitar that you were involved with.
We had some fun though doing that.
Oh, I bet you did.
And then there was a lot of jamming went on afterwards. So it was quite a good introduction to music and performing. Anyway,
I talk about this guitar that you were involved with, the special edition Staccato guitar. Sounds like a fantastic product. It had interchangeable neck. Is that right?
It was a sort of mad idea, and we spent a lot of time and effort on it, but it was basically doomed to failure. But it was mag alloy casting, quite sort of revolutionary and stuff. And I mean, it seemed like a good idea. In fact, we need what I don't know if you've been involved in business and stuff yourself, but in the end, because he had this tuning system. It wasn't me. I was just involved in helping doing fronting it and everything. The guy who designed it and everything. And he had this tuning system that worked, but it was quite sophisticated. And we nearly sold the tuning system. Fender were going to buy the whole thing and have it manufactured. We could have actually turned it around by this selling and licensing this tuning system. And then that fell through because the pound was so high at the time. I mean, business is so difficult, isn't it? Like everything seems right. The international price of the pound is so high. It's not. You can't. There's no margin left. Oh, so it was slightly doomed to failure. But yeah, I met a lot of people in the music thing. We went to music trade shows, and that's another world. All the people that make guitars and musical instruments, and Next question.
Your albums recently have gone down a path of the roots music, a real melting pot of roots music styles, which I guess is your first love. In hindsight, do you think right back from the beginning of your recording career you would have preferred to go down that road?
Well, in fact, on that very first album, I did have an accordion and stuff, and I think I was sort of quite interested in that. But I don't know. I mean, I was just discovering what it was. I went into that roots music. I had a friend called Robin McKidd who had a band called the Balham Alligators, and he was a great musicologist, and he knew Scottish music, Irish music, Western swing, some jazz. He knew all these different kinds of music, and he could play it. And as you mentioned about, there was a big gap between my records. So when he had this band, and I really liked this band, but they played, he had a great guy playing Grant Watkins, he toured a lot with Bill Wyman and Van the Man and people like that. He was a keyboard player, but he played great accordion. Robin played fiddle and guitar, and they played this kind of Cajun music, which was great fun and really exciting, great to dance to and everything. But they always played cover songs of American, good cover songs of American tunes or American songs. So I thought, well, what if I wrote my own ideas and used that kind of hook, some of those hooks. I mean, not unlike what the Rolling Stones did. They listened to blues music and rhythm and blues, and then they thought, okay, well, let's rock. They more or less had to write their own songs, because what's the point of just copying someone else's songs? You become a covers band. You don't want to be a covers. Thing about being in the music business, you don't want to be a covers band.
Yeah.
So you've got to have your own material, and the stronger that material is, the better everything's going to be. So I started writing some songs along these kind of veins, and I found out what a two-step was, and I had the fiddle, because I'm only self-educated. I really don't I'm a bit of a slow learner. So I started writing these songs, and I wrote some with Charlie Hart, and I thought, well, okay, I think, why not? It's okay. And I was quite heartened. That first album that I did over here was just called Atcha, and Tony Parsons, who was a kind of a critic, he's now a writer, but he used to write for the Telegraph, and he did a review of that record. And that, I think that week that it came out, Sting had a record out, someone else, and he said there was one of my tunes called Covered Love, and he said, he sort of like said, wow, he's a bit a lyricist, a bit Johnny Mercer, and he was like really kind about it. And he said that he played it to his girlfriend, but he didn't tell her who it was. And then so that's the thing about the association, if you don't know sort of who it was. So I wrote some of those songs, and then I did work a few different areas, and I remember I had a song called Whispering Wind, which was a bit like a song Bing Crosby might have recorded,
Yeah.
And something, it was like a Cole Crooner song. And a friend of mine called Hal Lindis, he played with Dire Straits, and I did some writing and stuff with him, and I played it to him. He said, are you crazy? You can't record that. What are you doing that for? Because people doing rock and roll and stuff are like, they operate quite a narrow sort of area, and if you do something like a kind of Bing Crosby song, they just puzzled. But tell you who did help with that, who's now moved to Australia, is Leo Sayer.
Oh yes, yeah.
He came and sang on that with me and did all the harmonies, and he loved it. He said, oh great. And I think people were getting more open to different kinds of stuff. I mean, personally, I've always listened to old. When I was a kid, you mentioned that first question. I mean, I was listening to people like Muddy Waters. They were already quite old men, by the time we were listening to. But I mean, I never thought, God, they're a load of old tossers, old guys. And then when we started listening back to sort of Sleepy John Estes or Leadbelly, we were intrigued by the where it all came from and the ancient sort of places that some of this stuff came from. And so I've always been interested in kind of old songs. I mean, you can't go back that far, but I mean, I did actually just pick up recently an old CD. I bought some Frank Sinatra, someone else, and Bing Crosby. And the Bing Crosby one was brilliant. The songs he'd chosen and the way he did it. He was obviously a terribly popular artist, but you have to have respect for him or what he did and how he was so relaxed, you know. Because I do remember when we had telly in the 60s, there was a show that came in. It was all black and white, obviously. It came into our houses, and it was Perry Como, and he had an American TV show, and he would practically sit in an armchair in front of a fire and sing a song. And I thought, that's not a bad way to make a living, is it, really? You know? And that sort of stayed with me. The kind of, of course, rock and roll was all a bit strutting your stuff and all that, but it's quite good. The other side of the music to have this kind of very easy, relaxed delivery, and if you can do that, it's wonderful because it makes people relax, and then you slowly bring them into your little circle, and and it's much more of it's quite an interesting way to bring people into the sort of spell of what you want to do, rather than this crash bang, chang chang chang
in your face,
stuff. So obviously, if I come out there and there's only two of us, we're not going to be, heavy duty rock and roll band. So we're going to have to use more of those kind of little delicate skills.
So
yeah,
it is just Charlie coming with you. You two go back a long, long way, don't you?
Charlie coming with us, but we may pick up some other players. I mean, when we get out to Bendigo, I expect there's a couple of bands out there we might play a bit with, and incorporate in if there's time to sort of. Unfortunately, I can't bring a whole band out. It just doesn't make economic sense.
No, that's fair enough. What do you look for in musicians to make them the kind of musician that you want to work with?
They don't moan too much when they're on the road. That's very important.
Very important.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the important thing is getting the musicians to play your songs and interpret them. And I did an album here in my barn. I'm in Somerset, and I met a couple of kind of top flight musicians. We're playing cricket. There's a guy called Richard Thompson who's Fairport Convention and all that, and he had this cricket team. So I would play cricket with him. He was sort of dodgy leg break bowler and sort of, and then he had Danny Thompson playing with him, who's this bass player of sort of legendary proportions if you're into music, and John Etheridge, who's a guitar player who played originally with Soft Machine and that, and as jazzer, but he plays almost like classical stuff and all kinds of stuff. And he's the most dreadful. You never want to bat with him because all he ever does is swing and miss. He's one of those dreadful things. So anyway, I asked John Etheridge and Danny Thompson came down here and did an album with me, with my drummer Malcolm, and I had Andy Shepherd, who's a sax player, jazz. I mean, they're all really kind of jazzers. And I was not amazed, but I was quite honoured that they came to play with me, because Danny Thompson has played with every top musician that you can name, and Eric Beerball, whoever he's playing with, and John Williams. I mean, plays with John Williams, and he used to play with Stefan Grappelli. He's played with everybody. You go on the YouTube, he's playing with Billy Billy drummer. What's he called? Billy Cobham.
Billy Cobham,
He's on
yep.
stage jamming with Billy Cobham, some kind of jazz thing. Wow, these guys are like top players. They're coming to my barn to play my songs. And but the nice thing is, you see, no one's ever played these songs before, so you play these songs to them, and they go, "Oh yeah, okay." So then they work out the little arrangement bits, and I can do this here, and I'll let that there. And that's what they really enjoy, because they're playing songs for the first time, and they enjoy being part of that creative process, because then you're just really a songwriter. And so what you're looking for then is people interpreting your song. And Danny was fantastic, because he said, "Oh no, just slow it down." He said, just anchor it there. He's done all these sessions. He's been there. If it's no good, he'd tell you. So he said, "No, that's good. Do it. Like that." And that was like quite. And we did it all live with no overdubs. But Andy Sheffield came and played a little bit of overdub, but I sang it all live. And it was like. It was wonderful, and just to have that experience. And I don't think Danny really plays anymore. And he's now well in his 70s, and he's had a few heart attacks and stuff. So I'm pleased I did that. And some of those songs I'll be able to play. What I've got coming out is October the 20th. BMG are releasing it's kind of calling it All the Best. It's like 16 tracks. Have you got all that info?
I've got the info about it. Yeah, that's fantastic. What did you use any particular criteria that you use when you were doing the song selection for that?
Well, it was quite difficult, and it ended up being quite rocky. It's quite like, because and then I managed to kind of bring it down a bit towards the end, and I have a few quieter songs and that on it, and then a couple of things that haven't been released. Then I did a new one. It was a harder process than I thought. It took me quite a long time, but I think it's all the better for it. John Dent did a great job. He does all this he lives up the road from me. He does all this mastering, and so he's got a great pair of ears, and he listens to it. And then I was mastering an album, the Ridge one that I mentioned with Danny Thompson, and he said, "Well, when I was doing Legend, Bob Marley," I went, "Yeah, okay, all right, John. Yeah, I agree with you." One of the biggest selling CDs of all time was Bob Marley Legend.
Yeah,
and he put that stuff right on records, and so I have massive respect for him. But I think when you asked me that question about what you look for, I think good ears. That's always a good thing. There are a lot of good people play, and they can be very good at playing. But if they don't listen, there are a lot of good people that play on their own, and they don't really listen to what other people are doing. And they always say, if you're not playing very well, you should just don't worry about what you're doing. Just listen to everybody, what else is.
Yeah.
So I think it's a kind of quite a good function. And one of my functions is to do that. It's like you're really MDing the whole thing. It's like kind of what my brother does with the Rolling Stones. You got to get the songs together, and you do this there and that. Though he has Chuck Leavell to help him a lot, but it's a kind of important unseen thing that with bands, because people come up and say, "Oh, isn't that guitar player fantastic?" That's kind of really obvious, but someone's brought all those players together, rehearsed them, and they've done that thing, man. But you don't really see that. It's like a play. You don't see the director in the play. You just see the person that's giving them, the important thing. Oh, aren't they wonderful? It might have been the director that got them to do all that, in the first place.
Well, Chris, but I'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute treat to speak with you.
Do you need tracks or anything?
I might send you an email on that. Yeah, there might be one or two things we could put in. Yeah, it'd be fantastic.
When's it going to go out?
I'm going to put this to air before your Melbourne shows, not the Bendigo ones. Before your Melbourne, the Caravan. I think you're at Birds Basements too, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'll put it in probably in a week or two before those shows.
Well, could you just, why don't you just download that CD? It's only cost us $6 or $7.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'll do that. I'll do that.
I mean, it's easier than me sending you MP3s. It's a bit of a faff.
Yeah, no problem. We'll do.
Download that album.
All the best. Is that downloadable yet?
Yeah.
It is fantastic. Okay, I'll do that. I'll do that right away.
That'd be the easiest thing.
Yeah, for
Right,
sure.
nice to meet you. Will I meet you in person?
Hopefully, I'll probably try and get to the Caravan gig because that's just down the road from me, and I go there regularly. So we'll look out for you.
Nice to meet you.
You too, Chris. Good on you. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Cheers.